Guatemala, Central America. According to most mainstream scholars and archaeologists, the earliest human settlements in this region date back over 14,000 years. Here can be found numerous ancient artifacts, and among them is this one, the figure of a man lying inside what appears to be the shell of a turtle.
And when I asked the local archaeologists there, what is this? They said, without the flinching of an eye, well, this is, according to legend, the giant flying turtles which flew around in Guatemala. The entire body is aerodynamically fashioned. The extremities are pressed in an aerodynamic fashion against the body of this turtle. And if you look closely, it's as if there's some modern-day fighter pilot glasses or goggles. This right here is from the same culture, from the same region where they created a turtle in clay. So they knew exactly what a turtle looked like. It looks like a snapping turtle. And what we have here, that is everything but a turtle. It's something else. In their frame of reference, they were able to use the turtle as the best example of what they might have seen that the gods used to fly around in.
Halfway around the world, in 329 BC, the Greek ruler Alexander the Great planned the invasion of India. But according to ancient texts, his army was supposedly thwarted by a strange attack from the skies.
As Alexander's army was getting ready to cross the Indus and invade India, suddenly in the sky appeared these flying discs. And they began dive bombing at the war elephants that were part of Alexander's army. And what these flying discs did was cause stampedes within Alexander's own war elephants, who then ran amok throughout his army, tearing up the camps and everything. And after that, Alexander's generals met with him and they said, no, we're not going into India. This is it. We're going to turn back. And that was the end of that war campaign.
But whether in ancient times or much more recently, so-called flying saucers are often described as being unaffected by gravity or the basic laws of physics.
You know, I know that people who have seen extraterrestrial vehicles in modern times have said, how in the world could it be doing that? For example, it's moving through the sky and it's going 20,000 miles per hour and makes a right-hand turn without decelerating. That isn't possible using normal aerodynamics.
When jets have been scrambled after flying saucers, the saucers are described as suddenly turning at right angles at super speeds and just zipping off in what seems like impossible aerobatic maneuvers. And this can be explained as the kind of technology they're using, which is a gravity control. It's artificial gravity. So when you're inside of a gravitational field that you're creating yourself around your craft, the gravity of the Earth doesn't have a force on you.
But although aircraft propulsion by means of gravity manipulation is beyond the limits of current technology, many scientists claim it is theoretically possible. In Davis, California, inventor Dr. Paul Mahler tests the boundaries of real-life science with a recreational flying vehicle called the New Era.
The New Era is a very simple device to fly. It has 8 lifting ducted fans, as we call them, each one driven by its own engine. Well, one of the big advantages in this kind of round shape is that you end up with the strength in the skin of the vehicle itself, much like the shell of a beetle. And that gets you a very, very strong design. This airframes you see over here next to this vehicle, which are similar to this, weigh only 75 pounds apiece, which is incredible. You got a complete airframe that's capable of lifting 1,500 pounds with a 75-pound shell.
But could the inherent design strength of a disc-shaped object be the key to overcoming the forces of gravity? And does the prevalence of flying saucer sightings suggest a connection between anti-gravity technology and extraterrestrial visitations?
Gravity is one of the most unknown forces in physics today. And when we do understand it, we'll be able to find out a way to shield ourselves from it, or to provide a device, a method, electromagnetically, but with some much greater knowledge than we have today, where we eliminate it within the vehicle's operations.
1971. Eastern India. It was here, at the Sanskrit College in Calcutta, that Eric von Daniken met with Professor Dilip Kanjilal to study the Vedic Sanskrit, an ancient language used in religious Hindu texts.
Professor Dilip Kanjilal has gone through old Indian texts and made modern versions of it. Now it comes out in the old books. The so-called gods, they used flying machines to travel from heaven to earth.
According to the ancient Vedic texts of India, the gods descended from the sky in flying vehicles. They refer to those vehicles as Vimanas. There are very detailed descriptions what these Vimanas looked like, how they traveled from place to place, what was necessary in order to pilot them. All those things are described in ancient Hindu texts that are thousands of years old.
And for Eric, he naturally felt that these Vimanas were real nuts and bolts aircraft. And of course, he's saying these are the vehicles of the ancient astronauts.
When Eric first went to India, he explored a whole bunch of different sites, and he quickly came to the realization that India is a treasure trove for the ancient astronaut theory, because all over India, we can find these magnificent temple towers that are referred to as stupas and also Vimanas. And so we have to ask ourselves, where did the form for a stupa come from?
Another great contribution of Eric is that he focused on India. Very few people had really studied the ancient Indian civilization, even though it is thousands of years old. And what he saw there were structures which were alleged to have been replicas of Vimanas.
So many Hindu temples in the Far East, they are representations in their architecture, what was going up in the sky. So the upper part of a Hindu temple often is seen as a flying object, as a Vimana.
And basically what we're being confronted with is the realization that these people built in stone objects which they seem to have seen in the sky.
When we look at the most ancient records we have coming out of the Vedic texts in India, there are clear descriptions of aerial battles taking place, Vimanas. So this really starts to raise the question about our own cycle of history. Is it completely linear, or is it possible that we're just starting to rediscover ancient technology that did exist thousands of years ago?
Ancient texts all over the world talk about flying vehicles, people who could fly through the air, flying horses. But it was Eric who really put it together, that the gods weren't just flying around like Superman. They had to get into some kind of nuts and bolts craft, just like we do, and go somewhere. And this was the chariots of the gods.
Enoch tells us about the guardians of the sky who came down. He says they are called fallen angels. and they wanted to have sex with humans. And the offspring of it were giants. So there were sexual contacts between extraterrestrials and the humans.
What does this mean? Well, it's very simple. Eric von Daniken's interpretation was, we are nothing else but hybrids of an extraterrestrial race that jump-started our civilization thousands and thousands of years ago. And that extraterrestrials, in fact, gave us intelligence. Homo sapiens existed for 250,000 years, but only in the last 50,000 years, this quantum leap all of a sudden happened where we went from munching bananas in a cave to essentially building civilizations.
Science is holding out great hope and expectation that at one point they will find this missing link between everything else on planet Earth and us. But despite looking for over 150 years, they haven't come any closer. The answer might be found in what our ancestors have always said, which is that we have been made by the gods, that we are not like anything else here on planet Earth. We stand out because we have been created.
As we look at the whole history of this planet, there is this huge question. How many advanced intelligences have been on this planet, maybe for millions of years, terraforming and manipulating genes in all kinds of life, and that maybe even modern human is one of those manipulated genetic creations?
In the 21st century, modern transportation and communication methods have connected the world like never before. Products or ideas, no matter where in the world they may have originated, can spread to even the most remote countries. A hip-hop hit in Brooklyn might make it big in Tokyo before it's even heard in Manhattan. This cultural interconnection has transformed the globe. But is it new? Mainstream archaeologists believe ancient civilizations such as those found in the remote Pacific Islands, Asia, and South America developed independently from each other. But ancient astronaut theorists contend that similarities in building styles and beliefs found in these cultures suggest that a worldwide trade route may have connected them to each other.
But just like we have airports today around the world, in ancient times with the Vimanas, there would have been hangars for the craft, airports for them to land, and those airports would have been situated in strategic places around the world. And that's exactly what we see in remote places.
Legends of air travel are also found in ancient Africa and the Middle East. According to the Kebra Nagast, a holy book of the Ethiopians, written sometime before the 2nd century AD, the Queen of Sheba was once given a gift of a flying carpet by King Solomon of Israel.
The Kebra Nagast is one of the most important texts you've never heard of. The Kebra Nagast means the Book of Kings, and it is the most sacred book of the Ethiopians. In it, King Solomon, it's described, he had access to some type of a flying machine. And in that part of the world, the term flying carpet was always used very liberally. My question is, did they really mean actual flying carpets, or was it another term with which to describe some type of a flying machine?
This was the original chariots of the gods that Eric von Daniken talked about. The flying magic carpets of the Arabian Nights stories. There are traditions in the Middle East of King Solomon having this airship and flying to different places in the Middle East, certain mountains, which are known as the Mountains of Solomon. These may have been certain airports or landing areas for these Vimanas. Nicholas Roerich, famous Russian-American explorer who traveled all through Central Asia and Tibet in the 1920s, he too claimed that Tibetans had traditions of King Solomon flying to Tibet in this aircraft.
The Kebra Nagast also describes how King Solomon used his flying airship to make maps of the world. But could these have any relation to other ancient maps some believe may have been made by extraterrestrials?
Some of these maps show the world not as it looks today, but as it looked during the last ice age. And this is really hard to explain. Everybody's heard of the Piri-Reis map, but they've perhaps not heard of the Rontius-Phineas map or the Mercator maps that show Antarctica in great detail, hundreds of years before Antarctica was even discovered.
One of the most referenced stories of ancient aircraft is found in a surprising place, the Bible. In the book of Ezekiel, the prophet describes a flying chariot containing wheels within wheels and powered by angels. Although Bible historians suggest Ezekiel was speaking symbolically about the terrifying enemies facing Israel, could this be another example of an alien visitation and proof that prehistoric aircraft existed?
In the story of Ezekiel's throne chariot, this flying vehicle that doesn't seem to have any means of propulsion, if we thought of the word angel as representing something like celestial energy, it sounds much more like a spacecraft then, because some of the angels are going back and forth. Well, that sounds like flames. That sounds like propulsion. Some of them are wheel-like. Well, those sound like flying saucers.
Our ancestors weren't idiots. Ezekiel saw something that was so frightening to him that he fell to his knees. Then, out of the glory of God came this being in these bright clothes that looked like metal and told Ezekiel, "All right, man, we brought you here. We want you to measure this monument, this building." And Ezekiel asks, "Well, why should I do this?" And the being says, "That's why we brought you here." And then you have 40 pages in the second part of the book of Ezekiel with measurement after measurement after measurement of this gigantic building, in which, by the way, the glory of the Lord landed.
In the early 1970s, NASA scientist Joseph Blumrich set out to disprove the theory that what Ezekiel witnessed was a spaceship.
Joseph Blumrich is your proverbial rocket scientist. He worked on the moon project for NASA, and from the mind of a rocket engineer, started to look at what was written in the first part of the book of Ezekiel, and after many months of research, Joseph Blumrich came to the conclusion that what Ezekiel described in his eyewitness report, it was indeed a type of spacecraft.
Joseph Blumrich would go on to write The Spaceships of Ezekiel. Several years later, a German structural engineer named Hans Herbert Bayer sketched out a blueprint of the second section of the book of Ezekiel, where Ezekiel is told to construct an open-top building to house the flying chariot.
Ezekiel's spaceship fit exactly into the temple that Hans Herbert Bayer recreated. So what we have here is a proof by indication. Here we have a NASA engineer and a structural engineer. They didn't know of each other's work, and both pieces fit together like a puzzle. In any court of law, that's evidence that would hold up.
I think that scientists feel uncomfortable with the notion of the lost civilization precisely because the evidence for it is so ambiguous. It's not so in your face that it's immediately obvious. And, you know, the result is that science has not welcomed this idea. It'll take much more evidence before it's widely accepted.
The God that I believe in doesn't need a vehicle in which to move around from point A to point B. Whatever was described in the Old Testament wasn't God. It was a misunderstood flesh and blood extraterrestrial whom our ancestors misinterpreted as being divine and supernatural. And why? Because of misunderstood technology. And that is the underlying thread that applies to all of the ancient astronaut theory.
Southern Mexico. Surrounded by dense forests in the foothills of the Tambala Mountains, lie the ruins of the ancient Mayan city of Palenque. Established as early as 1800 BC, Palenque was one of the key population centers of the ancient Maya civilization that dominated present-day Central America for nearly 2,000 years. Without metal tools, the wheel, or pack animals, the Maya built cities like Palenque across a vast region with incredible architectural precision.
There are a number of texts around the Maya world that mention 4 cities in association with 4 directions. Palenque is recognized in these texts as the western capital of the Maya world. The southern one was Copan, the eastern one was Tikal, and the northernmost one was Calakmul.
What I find the most impressive about them is that they were able to build a civilization out of the jungle. Jungles have really thin topsoil, and for them to be able to support a huge population, which is 20 or 30 times what the population is in that area today, is amazing.
Regarded by scholars as one of the most sophisticated and complex civilizations in the ancient world, Maya triumphs included numerous scientific achievements in agriculture, engineering, and astronomy.
They didn't have a lot of things that we think of as the hallmarks of advancement, but what they did have is advanced mythology, advanced language, an advanced religious culture.
The site of Palenque is still a vast, unexcavated site. They think that only 10% of the city has so far been excavated by archaeologists. The aqueduct system here at Palenque was very sophisticated, and the Mayans were actually able to have water pressure by siphoning water channels off of the main river. All the Mayan cities had ball courts in them where they played this celestial game where the players would knock a rubber ball through a stone or wooden hoop. It's thought that this is a representation of alignments of the sun.
When you start looking at all the various cultures, whether it is the ancient Babylonians, the ancient Egyptians, or the Mayans, we now know that the people who were by far the most advanced was the Mayans.
According to mainstream historians, by the 9th century, the great Maya cities were abandoned, and the Maya people had vanished. But why? Many blame the disappearance of the Maya on war, overpopulation, and drought. But might the Maya have left behind clues to suggest that their origin and destiny had been plotted by otherworldly forces? 1952. Archaeologist Alberto Ruiz discovers the pyramid tomb of King Pakal, who ruled over the ancient Mayan city of Palenque from 615 to 683. During his nearly 70-year reign, Pakal transformed Palenque, creating some of the most significant inscriptions and monuments of the ancient Maya civilization.
The city of Palenque was sacked by the ruler of Calakmul. So this was really tragic for the city itself. And it sets the stage for Hindu Pakal himself, who becomes king at a very early age, and then takes this city that's been destroyed and now brings it up to what becomes one of the most important cities of the late classic period.
This is the famous Temple of the Inscriptions behind me, perhaps the most famous pyramid in all of the Mayan world. It was in 1948 that the French-Mexican archaeologist Alberto Ruiz began his excavations at the top of the Temple of Inscriptions. What he found there was the famous staircase leading down into the depths of the pyramid. But the staircase was completely filled in with rubble of small stones and dirt. It took him 4 years to slowly excavate step by step down the pyramid until he finally came to the tomb of Lord Pakal and the giant sarcophagus and lid that the pyramid were built around.
Arguably, the most remarkable Mayan artifact ever found, the stone sarcophagus lid of King Pakal, has produced considerable controversy. Mainstream scholars believe the depiction is of King Pakal on a journey to the underworld. But ancient astronaut theorists believe the king is portrayed seated at the controls of a spacecraft and have dubbed him the Palenque astronaut.
He appears to be going into space. He's the original rocket man. There, manipulating his spacecraft, going into space.
We have maintained for a very long time that the depiction here is of King Pakal sitting in some type of a spacecraft, because he is at an angle like modern-day astronauts upon liftoff. He's manipulating some controls right here. He has some type of a breathing apparatus or some type of a telescope in front of his face. His feet are on some type of a pedal. And down here, you have something that looks like an exhaust with flames.
In 2011, the strange carving on King Pakal's sarcophagus lid was translated into a 3D replica by model maker Paul Francis.
When I saw this, I instantly said, there's a guy in a space capsule. You know, it doesn't need to be spelled out for me. I don't have to find anything. It was already there. It was carved many, many years ago.
I think this is absolutely extraordinary because this is definitely one of the most compelling pieces in the ancient astronaut theory. And to finally see Pakal as a 3D sculpture, to me, is a dream come true. For the longest time, we have said that what is on this Pakal lid is not something symbolic. It was something that the artist saw or was told about, and then he or she tried to recreate this on a slab. I love the craftsmanship. I love how you know, at the bottom of the Palenque slab, you see something like the flames.
It looks like fire.
Exactly.
And I had to do a little interpretive. I put engine bells on instead of the flame, but that's the thruster stage.
I also love the detail that you have underneath his right foot, where his foot is resting on a pedestal. And that is exactly what we can see on the Palenque slab, and how his hands are manipulating some controls. And also this kind of breathing apparatus that's going on in front of his nose.
The breathing apparatus is actually a very neat piece. It's called the giver of life. The soul transfers through this. And a giver of life to me would be air. I mean, we breathe air. This is a guy who needs this mass to survive.
Because where is he?
Outer space.